All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Real-World Best Practices for CA Workload Automation AE 11.3.6. Today we're joined by DK from Robert Mark Technologies. I'm going to go ahead and just hand things over to him, let him do his own introduction, and then we'll get started. Take it away, DK.
Okay, thank you, Len. So I'm DK. I've been with RMT for about 6 years now, and prior to that I was with CA, leading the QA team. Was leading the QA team for Autosys and WCC, and then I quit CA and started working with RMT as a workload automation consultant. So overall, about 13 years of experience, 14 years of experience with Autosys, and I am happy to be able to present the real-world best practices from our perspective. This is, a short disclaimer. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It doesn't mean that if you don't do this, you'll be in trouble. It's just based on our experiences that we've seen out in the field, a couple of things that, make things better for you, make life easier for you. Quick intro about RMT. I'm sure many of you know us. We work on all of the CA workload automation products, workload automation AE, DE, CA7, ESP, all of them. About 18 years in the business, about 650 engagements. 650 was when this presentation was done. This was, I think, last November for CA World. So, that number has changed again. We're going to be talking about best practices for WCC, best practices for Autosys, best practices for EEM, how to leverage self-service and agent upgrade, Cadence, and best practices around agent upgrades. So, quick question, Len, before we start off, do we leave the questions to the end, or is everyone able to ask their questions as the presentation progresses?
Just because most people are listening to this via the WebEx broadcast and actually on the audio line, the best thing for them to do is along the way they can ask their questions in the Q&A box in the WebEx. If they don't see the Q&A box in the lower right of their screen right now, they can click on the question mark icon in the upper right and it will open. And then it's really up to you, DK, if you want to check it periodically and answer them, or if you want to wait till the end. That's really whatever is easier for you.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we'll start off with the Autosys best practices. One of the first things that we ask a customer to do when we try to design the environment for them is to ask if they have a SQL cluster or an Oracle cluster that they can use, a RAC database for Oracle, or a SQL cluster if they have a SQL Server license with Microsoft. And if they do, then we try to encourage them to use either the SQL cluster or the Oracle RAC. That way, Autosys is not, in the business of having to replicate to both the databases if you have a dual event server option. And that, you're leaving the clustering, you're leaving the replication part to the vendor supplied, the Microsoft or Oracle product itself, and that level of complexity is avoided completely on the Autosys side, right? So that gives you a high level of availability with the database, and it takes down a lot of processing from the Autosys side where it has to write to two databases at the same time. Try to avoid the usage of nested boxes. I know, again, as I said, this is not an exhaustive list. This is not something that if you don't do, you'll be in trouble. There are cases where you absolutely have to have nested boxes, and there are large companies that use them. But, as far as you can, try to avoid them. That reduces the overhead of recursively. The scheduler has to recursively evaluate each nested box to figure out the start time, if its conditions are met, and so on, and then that adds to the overall latency. So if you can avoid it, try and avoid it. Right. Try to break down box jobs into smaller chunks. So what we see often in customer sites is they have box jobs that are containing more than 500, 700 jobs at a time, right? It's not only difficult to manage that kind of a box, it's also adding additional performance implications. So when you go through that box, it again tries to evaluate to see if each job in the box has its own starting conditions, which would be a bad thing. They shouldn't have their own starting conditions, right? But there's schedules that come over from other schedulers like JMO and Control-M that, sometimes they have these conditions. And then you have dependencies. So all of those dependencies need to be evaluated to see, okay, can the job start or not. So if you break them down into smaller chunks and then have the dependencies between the boxes themselves, that will improve your performance. Okay, boxes that have a lot of jobs without any starting conditions. So try not to have jobs that don't have any starting conditions. So that will increase the time of, the processing of the runtime for that box. So, as far as possible, try to serialize the jobs. It doesn't have to be one after the other, but as long as there's a dependency, as long as, something's going after, the previous job that is finished, as long as you have successor jobs, you should be good. And then the scheduler is able to evaluate them much quicker than saying, okay, I've got 50 jobs inside of a box, all of them start at the same time, and then you're adding that additional load on the scheduler to say, okay, now I've got to start 50 jobs at that instant instead of saying, okay, I'm going to pick off these jobs sequentially. There's typically no need in a real world to start off like 50 jobs in the same box at the same time. Those 50 jobs could be spread across different boxes, different applications, and that may be acceptable, but, in the same box, there's typically very less, need for that kind of a situation. Indexing is one of my favorite things. If you can, drop and recreate the indexes. If you have a maintenance outage window that goes on, maybe every 3 weeks or so, that will be the perfect time to do the reindexing. There's the reindexdb.pl script that you can use that CA has supplied. That will help you with the reindexing, but if your DBAs don't like the reindexing script, they can come up with writing their own indexes, but that will have to be done in conjunction with talking with CA so that, they know exactly what's being done and how the indexes are being created. So the last point here is talking about multiple application servers. So this is, again, one of the things that we bring up. We say, okay, how many users do you have? How many, environments do you have? How many job runs per day do you have? Based on all this information, we say, is it possible that you can split the application servers so that, all the load is just not hitting one application server or, the application server that exists on the same box as the primary and shadow schedulers, if you have HA again. Even without the scheduler HA, you can have multiple application servers. You can set it up in such a way that WCC is just talking to its own set of application servers. Obviously, the application server talks to the database, so you have to make sure that the database connections and things of that sort are, available so that WCC, when it requests information from the application server, the app server is able to open up a connection to get that information. Again, there's also a lot of tuning that you can do in terms of the app server itself. You can say, increase the number of DB connections from the default, which is 16, to 32 or 64, and then again, based on that, you increase the number of processes and things of that sort. One of the other things that we do is set up something called a jump server. That is typically another machine on the network that most users have access to, and all it contains are a stripped-down version of the client binaries and an application server, right? And in most environments, what happens is the agent is installed along with the client. One of the downfalls with that is whenever there's an upgrade, you have to go back and upgrade all 50 agents that have all the clients, and then you have to upgrade all those clients all over again. This gives you one single point to say, okay, I'm going to give access to this server to all the users that need to run, the client binaries either through scripts or their own, if they have to log on and do something and they don't want to use WCC, they're more accustomed to using the command line, then they can just log on there to the jump server and then run their Autosys utilities. Okay, so moving on to WCC best practices. Do not use Derby unless it's a sandbox environment and you're just playing around, trying to see what the functionality is, what the capability is. Even there, if you can, avoid it. because it will not give you a good picture of the performance of WCC. Try to use Oracle or SQL Server, depending on what database your organization has a license with, and whichever the architects are letting you use in a company. So try not to use Derby as much as possible. Set up WCC in HA, that's the key. The old versions of WCC were, kind of hard to set up. I mean, not so easy. I won't say hard. They had the core and spectator model, and then you had to go through a bunch of things where you'd create Autosys jobs to get the information out of the core, put it back in the spectator, and then resync them. So all of that logic, all of that complexity has been taken away with 11.3.5 and above. 11.4 is even easier. You just point it to one database, SQL Server or Oracle, and multiple WCC sites then in HA. Obviously, you need to have the same type, so you can't be HTTP and HTTPS. You can have a mix of both. So as long as you standardize on one standard for the URL, you should be good. So again, HTTPS is supported with, I think, 11.4, Service Pack 2 and above. HA with HTTPS has been supported. So there were issues before where you would set up HTTPS and then you couldn't go with HA because it was just not supported with WCC. And then once you have WCC in HA, you also have the ability to load balance those WCC servers, right? And typically you would use something like an F5 load balancer, or you could use a software-based load balancer to, basically the easiest form is to do a round robin to say, okay, I've got this VIP that I'm exposing to the users, and once they hit the URL, the load balancing solution will take care of, determining which actual host that VIP needs to redirect to, right? So it could be a round robin, or it could be a, least used server mechanism, depending on, you have to, again, work with the F5 team or the load balancing team to figure out which one is the best, and then work with them to get it set up. Alert deletion thresholds. This is one of the things. In a way, the default is actually set to 7 days in WCC, so you can leave them for 7 days. But if you think about it, if you have an alert, a job failure or something of that sort, or an EP shutdown or EP rollover, database rollover, any of those alarms, if you're looking at them in WCC and you haven't addressed them beyond a day or 2 days, then it doesn't really help you. It's not really doing anything. If you're not addressing a job failure if it's open for more than 2 days, then there's a problem with the process. So what I would recommend is keep that number for 2 days or 3 days, and then once you establish a good number of days to retain, that will be the number that you would go back in the WCC config and set it with. So, typically we set it back to 2 days or 3 days. And again, all these alarms are still available on the Autosys database, especially if you have iDash, then all of this information is still available on the iDash site, so you can still query all the information. The only reason you wouldn't have this information in the Autosys database is if your DB main is clearing out all that information. Right, so as long as you're comfortable setting your DB main parameters to say, okay, don't clear out within a certain set of days, then you should be good. And in most companies that have audit requirements, they usually store up to a year's worth of data. So you usually have all that information handy and available in the Autosys database. So there's a self-service hint here. Binding EEM with LDAP lets the users, make their own changes or look at job changes or look at job definitions, do all of that in the development environment. So, prior to EEM, most companies would not have this ability to, let end users modify their jobs even in production with their own IDs. In development with their own IDs. In production, it is strictly ruled out. It's read-only. the problem was they would give out a service account and say, okay, you can log in with this ID because this is the one that we're able to secure in native security, saying it has, the permissions to edit the job. And then you wouldn't be able to track it saying, well, who actually made that change. It'll show up as the service account that made that change. Now with EAM, once you bind it with LDAP, it'll actually show up with the ID that made the change. And so you have the additional granularity to say, okay, this job was changed or was, force started by this person at this time, and you can go back and, you can have that level of traceability if you need. Okay, next is security best practices. So when we think about security, we're talking about EEM. We always say, okay, these are the 4 questions, at the minimum 4 questions that you should think about, right? What are the functional roles? Is there an admin team? What level of access should they have? And typically the answer is full access, right? Everything from being able to stop the scheduler to changing something in Autosys secured, everything basically, right? And then who's part of the ops team? And then we say, okay, the ops team only needs access to monitor jobs and issue start job events or force start jobs or put them on hold and on ice. Basically issue send events whenever needed, right? So they don't get access to things like Autosys secure and send events with stop daemon. They don't get access to that. And again, one of the policies that actually helps with this is a send event policy that we're kind of talking about in the next point, but that actually helps you with saying, okay, I don't want to give them access to stop the scheduler using stop daemon, but they'd be able to force start a job or put jobs on hold, start jobs on ice, no exec, all of those events, right? So you can selectively choose to say, okay, this is the only send event that any person in the ops team can do, right? Now, most companies also have an ops/scheduler team. They're one and the same in a lot of companies, but some companies also have it separate, where the schedulers don't really work on user incidents or job failures. They are made basically there so that jobs can be updated, calendars can be updated, things of that sort, right? And if ops is not able to debug a particular issue with a job failure, then it goes up the chain to the schedulers and then back to the admins. And then the users, typically, what we recommend is in dev, give them access to the jobs that they own. Again, job naming conventions are key for this. You can also use the group and application attributes to differentiate who gets access to what in the Autosys instance, again, based on the EAM policies. But in production, it is, again, read-only. We never recommend that they, should start a job in production or anything of that sort. And if they already have such a model in place, we try to discourage them and have them move away from it. But if it's, if it's not possible or, if it's just not feasible in the time frame that we have, then we, let them go with it, but tell them that it's a bad thing to do. Enforcing naming standards is what we just talked about. So AS job, AS group, AS application, AS send event, AS calendar. Those are some of the policies that, come to mind when I want to lock down my Autosys instance to say, okay, this is the only set of jobs or objects that, an ID in a particular AD group has access to, right? And then on the other side, on the flip side, we say the admins have access to, everything under AS owner, AS send event, they have access to all of that. So you're locking it down to say, okay, nobody has access to run jobs as maybe the root account unless there's a real good justification or business need to do that, right? Again, that can be done using the AS owner policy. And again, self-service hint, EEM standard, job naming standards are key. So once you set those job naming standards up, you can say, okay, this group has access to jobs that have this prefix in the job name, and based on that, they're able to access and do whatever they need in the development environment for those jobs. in production, they're able to monitor just those jobs. Unless, of course, sometimes there's a need to say, okay, I need to look at jobs from another application. I need to know what happened to them because my flow is being held up, right? So in that case, they put in a request, it goes through the approval process, and then they're added to a group that sets them up with access. EEM HA, so it's almost a no-brainer. You definitely need EEM HA, and one of the reasons I bring up always at a client site is, okay, if you lose EEM, okay, let's go back one step. So if you lose WCC, you still have the command line, right? You can still pull up job definitions, so you can still issue jobs, send events for jobs through the command line. If you lose Autosys, your scheduling stops, then nothing else makes sense. That's our primary focus. But if you lose EEM and both your Autosys and WCC are up and functional, you can't actually do anything, right? Because you're not able to log into WCC when EEM is down because that connection with EEM and AD is broken, and so your authentication doesn't happen with AD. On the other side, the worst part of it is your client utilities will stop working because it's still bound to EEM, and there's going to be an authorization denied when you try to issue a forced start or you try to do something. So having EEM in HA is one of the most critical things that we suggest. Try not to put them as in WCC and EEM on the same server. But again, a lot of customers come back and say, okay, we're a very small environment. We don't need, separate servers for WCC and EEM. So again, it depends on the environment, the size of the environment, and then, how things work with their infrastructure group. Okay. The next point talks about which application to secure first. Do you secure Autosys first or WCC, right? So our recommendation is you go into EEM, you secure the Workload Automation AE app, you set up your EEM policies for AS job, AS control, those kind of things. And then that's about 80% of your job done, right? Because everything that you do from WCC or from the command line, or if you want to call a REST-based web service, or if you're writing your own, code using the Java SDK or C++ SDK, it all still comes back to this Workload Automation AE application for authorization requests. And if it denies you a request there, that means all the above, the WCC, the send events from command line, or Java SDKs, all of those will be denied. So as long as that is secure, you're about 80% of the way there. The other side is you're saying, okay, on the WCC side, there's things that I need to secure, right? I don't want users to have access to things like the config page. I don't want them to be able to go in, mess with settings, delete the Autosys server by mistake. So those are things that you basically say, okay, I'm removing access to the pages or the tabs that they don't need. And then you can also set up additional rules to say, okay, these are the views based on the monitor view control policy and things like that, where they have access to just, what they need. So again, we say go ahead with securing your Autosys application first, whether whether there are users that use the command line or not, make sure that is secure, and then secure the WCC part of it so that, you're in good shape at that point with security. So this slide here talks about using self-service and Autosys. Workload Control Center, as long as you're using that, as long as you've set it up with, EEM and using naming conventions on your jobs, you should be in good shape to say, okay, I can roll out WCC to all users in development, and they have access to just the jobs that they need instead of having the fear that they can accidentally go and modify someone else's job or kick off somebody else's jobs, right? So as long as you've got your naming conventions, which is, again, one of the self-service hints that we talked about, we should be in good shape. Critical path monitoring, you have tools like iDash that help you do that. So you can, predict your SLAs for the next day, in the future to see how far behind your jobs will be, how far they are today, and you can get alerted to say, okay, this job stream is running late, so something may be impacted. Based on that information, you can, take remedial action if needed, or, if there's nothing you can do, then it just runs longer that day. Lifecycle management, so that again, how does it tie back into the self-service thing? Users are able to create their own jobs in Dev or update them in Dev. They're able to test them in Dev, and at that point, all they need to do is give out a JIL file to the schedulers to say, okay, this is my JIL. They are in control of the jobs. The developers are in control of their own jobs. They turn it over to the production control team or the scheduling team, and then they're saying, like, okay, this field, this machine needs to change to something else. Or they, in most cases, they even make those changes. The owner, the machine, the profile, all of that information is already changed by the app teams and then provided to the scheduling team. Benefits of self-service. Now, there's not a lot of overhead. When teams try to make job changes in development, right? If it's not a self-service model, then there's a back and forth, between the users and the scheduling team to say, okay, I need to build a job, but I need to know what your requirements are, when it needs to run, what it needs to run, where it needs to run, right? All of that information. If you're already utilizing the self-service model and you've given them access, then you don't need to go back and say, okay, what is all this information? Fill out a form with all the information that we need. You can have them create the job, and there's still going to be questions like, how do I do this, or what is the best approach to get this scheduled properly? And those are the minimum questions that you'll have to answer. So the scheduling team and the ops team can actually work on issues or things that they have to work on instead of working with people to just define jobs, which is pretty mundane and routine. And then the adoption increases, right? Once you start rolling out self-service, users start using the product more, they like the product more, and they say, okay, hey, we use Autosys to schedule our jobs, why don't you use it as well? So then there's another, bunch of jobs that come in because of the adoption services. So enterprise-wide adoption, rapid delivery to change, rapid delivery of changes to production. The changes are already made. Most of the changes are, kind of tested in the lower environments in dev, UAT, or pre-prod. And then the only change is to say, okay, we change what we need to absolutely in terms of the job name or the job definitions, and then provide the JILs to the scheduling team. They load them in the production environment. You look at them, you verify that they've all been loaded as they should with the proper, attributes, and then you're ready to kick them off in production. Agent cadence. So this is one of the things that, a lot of customers typically forget. So, 11.3 onwards, the agents are, I would say, upward compatible. So the 11.3 agent, the base agent, is still compatible with 11.3.6 scheduler, right? But again, it's not a good practice to do that because you're behind, almost 7 service stacks behind. There's improvements with the agent itself. There's enhancements that have been made, so you're losing out on all of that. There are certain cases where you just cannot upgrade because maybe the OS will not support the new SP7 version or maybe even, the prior versions of the agent, so you have to be on it. In those cases, there's really nothing you can do unless there's an operating system upgrade again, and then you are able to upgrade the agent on that box to get to that supported release. So the approach that we are suggesting here is to take an N+1 approach, right? So if the agent is on SP7, then you in the development environment can be on SP6. You test it in the development environment, make sure that the users are all happy with, you give them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long your test cycle needs to take for all the users, and then you move SB6 up into the QA or test environment, right? At that point, dev, you can choose to leave dev as it is, or you can have the continuous upgrade model where dev is always on the latest version or one level behind, and then test is being promoted as you finish dev, and then pre-prod gets the new version as you finish testing in the QA environment, and then the production environment gets upgraded once you finish testing in pre-prod. So that way, you're at least on the latest near the latest versions of the agent. You have all the fixes that go in, all the performance enhancements that go into the agents, all the new features that go into the agents, but you're also not 7 service packs or 10 service packs behind on the agent, right? So that's kind of what we're that's what we recommend to our customers, and it's worked out pretty well in the large shops where you have this multi-tier Autosys environment. You have the dev, you have the QA, pre-prod, and prod. And then some of our customers have gone on with the continuous development. So there's always, upgrades on the agent in the dev environment. Whether you choose to upgrade to the new version in the QA, pre-prod, and prod or not depends on the outcome, what happens in dev. Okay. That is all I have. Any questions for you guys? Len, I will turn it back to you.
All right. Let's see if we do we have any questions. 1 second.
Okay.
I don't see any questions for you. So if that's it, I guess we can wrap it up then.
Okay. There was one chat request from Jen Barber about the presentation. Yes, we can send out the presentation, or Len, if you can put it on the communities, they will be able to download it as well.
Yeah. Just so everyone on the call knows, I did record this session, so I'll also be uploading a video replay of it. That'll either happen later today or tomorrow morning, and then after that, I'll also make sure that I post the presentation as well. So keep an eye out for that. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, DK, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.